والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا صدق الله العلي العظيم. زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam Iman here in Melbourne or across the world, wherever you're hearing my voice, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what is Iman? The verse that I recited at the beginning is a verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu amanu, O you who believe, believe. And when the ulama and the scholars and the mufassirin analyze this verse, they say, why did Allah say this? Why did Allah say to the people who believe, O you who believe, believe? As in, Allah's already saying they believe, but Allah's telling them believe. You're saying you believe, but Allah's telling you believe. There's something missing. And so when you find that it's possible for someone to say possibly that they think they have belief, but in reality that belief is not necessarily comprehensive and does not have all the elements of what deen truly is and what Iman is supposed to be. And so this invites us to reflect and ask this question: what is Iman, what is belief, and how does this relate to the message of Karbala and Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam? Now, to this end, does the work and does everything end now that Ashura has passed, or does it begin now? And I would invite you to think that the real world, the real work begins now. Meaning, this is when you need to plant the seeds that you will reap, inshallah, in the next future months and next year. Meaning making sure that you are doing and solving the problems that are there currently and for the future generation. Look, I had the opportunity to go to the procession, the Julus, mashallah, this past weekend, and it was a very big volume of people. It was many people, mashallah. It's wonderful. Now the question is, what are we doing with that magnitude, that critical mass? What are we doing with that number of people? For example, there are communities across the world where they don't have that many people. There are just few people. So their impact on society is limited maybe. But when you have a big community, like here, and then you combine and connect that community with another community, maybe Sydney for example, and you work together, then you are able to do things that can help people's life become better, here and abroad. For example, the Imam Bargas, the Hussainiyas, and I'm speaking for the next generation here and also for those who may be hearing my voice online, but look, right now, everywhere across the globe you go, the Shia community, like many communities, like every community has challenges, and sometimes people are not able to work together and things like this. Sure, it happens everywhere. But there's some things that we should be able to get together on. For example, that we have a common interest on. So for example, I have my belief in how I see the Ahlul Bayt in the Quran, very good. You have your way, you have your culture, your tribe, your views, no problem. But there are some things that are common amongst us that we can agree on. For example, economic development. For example, social development. For example, getting our kids into the top universities, getting them into the top businesses, for example. Getting them having a good marriage relationship, husband and wife. These are things that even if we have different aqeedah on, we should be able to say that, look, we have a council for the socio-economic development of the Shia community of Melbourne, for example. And the same thing happens in Sydney, for example. And then you have a national council that, okay, we have our differences, but we can still work together on those things that are of common interest, regardless of my difference of opinion on certain things. You see, in America, I'm not sure how it is here, but every community is looking after their own interests, and power to them. You go to the Hindu, the Indian community, Goldman Sachs estimated that their net worth in America, we don't know officially, but it's over $1 trillion just in America, this community. And they are very politically active, and they are very influential in society. So they're looking after their interests. Hats off to them, power to them. Credit due where credit is due. You look at other communities, everyone's looking after them, but it seems sometimes in our community, we have not found a way to work together. And working together is in our own interest. Because you have family members, I have family members, locally and abroad, who may suffer because we can't get our act together and to look at the big picture. Do you think Imam Ali alayhi salam, where 25 years his right was taken, do you think it was easy for him to deal with that? Read Nahjul Balagha. Imam Ali himself says in Nahjul Balagha, I dealt with this, it was like there was a thorn in my eye. This is how difficult it was to deal with this situation. You know, a thorn that pricks you, that maybe on a flower or a rose. He said, this situation was like a thorn in my eye, but still, Imam Ali alayhi salam, whenever they didn't know anything, he came to answer their questions. And they had to say, Lawla Ali, the halakal, Umar, and you fill in the blank. Because the idea was Imam Ali alayhi salam understood the bigger picture. And the bigger picture was the ummah. There's a tradition of Rasulullah that Ana wa Ali, we are the fathers of the ummah. Meaning what? The father, when they're dealing with an environment, they have to do what's in the interest of the family and the children, even if the children don't know what's in their own good. Sometimes the child gets disobedient, sometimes the child becomes rude, sometimes the child becomes agitated. But it's the father's job to be able to see the big picture and show love and affection and discipline when needed and respect when needed at the same time. But remember, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And so sometimes we start to say, do this, do this, but behind that as parents, we have a lot of love for our children, but we never communicate that love to them. We just say, do as I say. But they don't know that you're trying to do something in their interest. Similarly for the community, this happens. When you come to the community, people say, oh, do it my way, do this way, what I say goes. Well, let's figure out what's in the best interest of the whole community, right? And make decisions based on that. If not in the majalis, maybe you will have difference of opinions on who's the speaker and this. And believe me, if you want, you can have difference of opinion on anything. But it's also possible to have some agreement. It's also possible to see the bigger picture. It's also possible to do this. Sulh Hudaybiyah. When the peace treaty of Hudaybiyah happened between the Quraysh and Rasulullah and the Muslims, the person on the other side, name was Suhail, who was the one representing the Quraysh. And at that point in time, Rasulullah asked Imam Ali to write down the Sulh Hudaybiyah, the peace treaty of Hudaybiyah. And when Imam Ali is writing this down, he says, Ya Ali, write in the name of Allah and Muhammad Rasulullah. And Suhail on the other side says, hold on a second, if we believed you were Muhammad Rasulullah, then we would not be having this treaty with you, and we wouldn't have a disagreement with you. So now Rasulullah could say, no, what I say goes. And Rasulullah is the ultimate leader of leaders. But he didn't do that. He said, Ali, remove it, wipe it out. Muhammad Rasulullah, fair for this. Now, Imam Ali said, Ya Rasulullah, once I've written this, I cannot do this. So he gave it to Rasulullah. Rasulullah took it and Rasulullah removed it. This is also why we say Rasulullah was not lectured or taught by anyone, but he knew how to read and write. Otherwise, how did he remove Muhammad Rasulullah if he didn't know how to read and write, number one. Number two, Hasbuna Kitab Allah, when Rasulullah is leaving this world, he asked for a kalam and a paper and a pen. So if he didn't know how to read and write, why didn't they just give him the paper and pen? That proves that he knew how to read and write otherwise. So there's many istidlal for these things, but Allah had a wisdom as to why He didn't want him to write, so no one would say, oh, the Quran is something he came from his own pocket. Now come to this. When it comes to our community and the development of our society, we need leadership that is able to see the big picture and try to look for the next work for this generation, but also the next generation and what their needs are. And you may find their needs may be different. But for the counsels that can be made, believe me, everyone's suffering on the issues of husband-wife relations. It's everywhere. The issues of children and parents, how to interact effectively, how to have non-violent communication, effective communication, how to have a sense of peace and tranquility and meaning of why I'm here, what I'm supposed to be doing here. Why does Allah want me here? Is it just by happen chance? how to also have good activities for the betterment of the community that are healthy. For example, sports. For example, you pick your example, cricket, soccer, the likes. Sometimes sports keeps youth away from the worst of things, especially if they have the right crowd around them. So these are things that we need to be thinking about that are in the common interest of the community. Sure, you can have those other things, but someone has to say, look, there has to be a bigger vision at play, number one. Number two, when we come to this, what I want to discuss tonight is the sense of Iman and how does it inspire us to excellence, and what do we need to be doing around the year to build some of these things in our life. What is it that Allah wants us and His Messenger wants us to do and think about, especially when it comes to the challenges that we may face in the community. What is some motivation that we can get from Allah and His messengers and His representatives and the close ones to Him to help us understand this? How is it possible that deen, as people understand it, may be different than as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for us to understand it? How did this happen? Did it happen in history? Is there a precedent for it? And finally, what was the reason why Imam Hussain alayhi salam actually went to Karbala? What had happened in that environment? What did he see that others around him were not seeing or refusing to see? And finally, what was the tragedy of the Ahlul Bayt, particularly after the day of Ashura? Did it end, or was there more that they had to deal with? This is our agenda for tonight. Wherever you are, here in Melbourne, across the globe, sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the first level, when it comes to this, I want you, one thing that may help the next generation, it's helped me as well, and it's helped many athletes. My example is an athlete that we have in America by the name of LeBron James. He's a basketball player. And this helped him because he used to get a lot of criticism from people. People used to criticize him left, right, and center. They didn't even know him. But this has helped him and many other people, and it's actually helped me quite a bit too. There's a speech that I want you to read. In particular, is an excerpt from a speech. The speech is an excerpt. The excerpt is from the speech called Citizenship in a Republic by Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was one of the presidents of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, around World War I. And he gave a speech at the Sorbonne, the University of Paris. And that speech has a segment of it, it's called The Man in the Arena. The University of Paris is where Dr. Ali Shariati also got his PhD, where Durkheim, who I mentioned a few nights ago, was as well. And he gave the speech, and in the speech he says something that I want you to reflect on. He said, the credit does not belong to the man who is sitting in the stands, pointing the finger at the man who is in the arena, on the arena, and trying. Yeah, have you ever been to, have you ever seen the Colosseum, maybe in Italy, pictures have been there, or for example, you've seen a stadium, they have cricket stadiums here, maybe a Melbourne cricket stadium, or grounds, or some other things, or soccer pitches that are huge capacity. How many people are in the stands? And the seating capacity in the stands is much, too many people. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the stands. But how many people are on the pitch? How many people are playing the game? 10, 11, 12, a handful of people? Now, that person who's sitting all the way in the back in the stands is shouting at the player who's on the court, or on the field, or on the pitch. Does that person hear? That person may not even know they exist, especially if they're way far away. They have no idea. But everyone present and on television is watching what's happening on the pitch and the people who are there. Similarly, Roosevelt says, the credit does not belong to the one who is sitting in the stands watching the man who is the gladiator in the arena, on the arena, and pointing the finger and saying, you could have done this better, you could have done that better, you could have done this better, you could have done that better. But he says the credit belongs to the gladiator, to the man who is fighting and is in the arena and has their face marred with sweat and blood and toil. And they are daring greatly. They are striving and daring greatly. This person, or these individuals who are on the court, who are on the arena, the gladiators were Rasulullah. The gladiators were Imam Ali alayhi salam. The gladiators were Imam Hussain alayhi salam, who were fighting and struggling for the betterment of society, even though everyone else was either mocking or laughing or X, Y, and Z. Principle in life, always be on the field, be on the pitch. Those who talk about others, you can tell oftentimes when you talk about personality and people, your thinking is limited. When you want to think big, think about ideas, think about vision of changing the world and doing something. The people who are on the court, they are not bothering themselves with the opinions of people. They're intrigued and focused on doing something in life. Similarly, in life, always be pursuing a noble goal that is worthwhile. Otherwise, you'll be, as Imam Ali says, there's three categories of people. Imam Ali says, those who are the teachers, who are striving to teach. There are those who are the students, who are striving to learn. And the third are like the leaves in autumn, that are blow with wherever the wind goes. Most in society, you'll find, they'll just go with where the wind goes. This car is in fashion today, I'll get it. This house, this. Mimetic theory. Rene Girard, I mentioned this in the workshop. He said that we don't know why we want what we want. We want it because we mimic others. Two other people want something, and we don't ask why did they want it. We just say because they want it, I want it as well. And this happens over and over again in society. So now, come back to this. How can you have a sense of conviction of why you should do what you should do? How do we learn from the awliya of Allah, the ones who are close? Luqman. There's a whole chapter of the Quran called Surah Luqman. Now, it's important for us to understand this. One other option is I've heard some of the most beautiful tilawah throughout Melbourne, in this community and the other communities I visited. But also, the next level of that is to also maybe have the translation so people know what's happening, what's being said. So that we not only hear the beautiful recitation of the Quran, we also know what the Quran is telling us. That can be in Farsi, and in Hazaragi, it can be in Urdu, it can be all of the languages. Because Allah was saying something to us in that book. And unfortunately, if we don't get into the delve into that, we're missing so much of the benefit of what is in this great book. And so this is something that's an opportunity, not of criticism, but of improvement. So we can all go further in terms of understanding what is haqiqah and reality. So Luqman was a wise person. And Allah said that we gave him hikmah. And whoever Allah gives wisdom to, there's knowledge. And knowledge, you can read a lot of books, you can get them. But after knowledge comes wisdom. Knowledge is, knowing what to say, as they say. And wisdom is knowing when to say it. You don't always say what you know based on the time and space and who you're addressing. And so it's very, very important to keep these things in mind. So now, Luqman, he wanted to teach his son. He wanted to do tarbiyah of his son. He wanted to teach him some valuable lesson. He said, my son, let's go on this journey. He said, very well. So it was the father, the son, and they had a mule with them. A donkey or a mule. And so they embarked on this journey, and Luqman says to his son, he said, look son, I want you to sit on the mule, and I will walk, and we'll be okay, okay? Just listen to what I say. He says, okay, very good. So Luqman and his son's sitting on the mule, and Luqman is walking, and they set out on this journey in the desert. As they set out on this journey in the desert, eventually they pass by a town. And when they pass by the town of people they don't know Luqman, and Luqman doesn't know them. And so they pass by this town, and the people of the town begin to talk. They say, look at this father and son, look at this, and the mule. Look at this son, he has no respect, he has no adab, he has no akhlaq. The father's walking in the barren heat of the desert, and the son's sitting very comfortably on the mule. What were these kids today? So when this happened, he said, Luqman didn't say anything to them. He said, my son, did you hear them? He said, yes, Baba, I heard them. He said, very well. They went a little bit further. He said, my son, why don't we swap? I'll sit on the mule, you walk. He said, sure, Baba, no problem. So the son came down, and he started walking on the sand, and the father sat on the mule. They went a little bit further. They passed by another town on their journey. And this townspeople saw them. And they began to say, what kind of father is this? He has no rahmah, he has no mercy, he has no compassion. He is able-bodied, and his young son is walking in the desert, and he's sitting comfortably on the mule. Luqman didn't say anything to them. He said, son, did you hear what they said? Did you hear what they said? He said, yes. Oh, I heard. So let's continue. They continued on the journey. When they continued on the journey, Luqman said, let's do something. I'll get down, and we'll walk together. Leave the mule as well. So mule is by itself, Luqman's by himself, son is by himself, they're walking. They go further, they get to a third town. They pass by this new town, they haven't met anyone. The people see them, they start laughing. They say, how silly are this father and son? How silly are they? They're not educated, they don't know anything. They're jahil. They have a perfectly good mule, and they're not sitting or using it. They're just wasting it away. Luqman didn't say anything to him. He just said, my son, did you hear what they said? Say, yes, Allah, I heard. They went a little bit further. Said, my son, why don't we do this? why don't both of us sit on the mule? I said, yeah, Bob, sure, why not? So they both sat on the mule, and they continued on their journey. And when they continued on their journey, they passed the fourth town. And when they passed the fourth town, eventually, they passed these new people, and these people started saying, animal rights, Zalimeen, what kind of people are these? Father and son have no rights, that animal also has rights. Why are you sitting and torturing this animal with all of your weight? Luqman didn't say anything to them. He said, my son, did you hear them? I said, Baba, I heard them. I said, very good. They went a little bit further, and they got close to their destination. They were getting by the river. When they got by the river, he said, my son, did you notice? Every town that we passed, people had something to say and object about. First one, they objected. Second one, they objected. Third one, they objected. He said, I wanted you to learn one thing, and that is, you can never make the people happy. So never try to make the people happy. Only make your goal in life to make one individual and entity happy. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the main thing that your focus in life should be. Whatever you do, do it ikhlas, do it with sincerity, do it qurbatan Allah, to make the world a better place. If you try to make the people pleased, you will lose this dunya and in akhirah. Because the people will never be satisfied. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
So there's two categories of people in the world. Or there's a few actually. As I remind you, there's three sides to a coin. Heads, tails, and the edge. And the edge is what people forget about. In my way or in the highway. But there's always another perspective that you didn't think about, that you didn't know about. And it's important to keep that in mind as well. In life, you'll find a few different types of people. You'll find those who make things happen. Those who make things happen. They'll get the arrangements made, they'll get it done. There's a second category who watch things happen. And then there's a third category of people who wonder what happened. You don't want to be in that last category, and you don't want to be in the second category. You want to be in the first category of those who make things happen. You definitely don't want to be those who just constantly watch and those who wonder what happened. I have no idea. And so it's important for you to be astute in terms of activism and working on this. Now I want to share something here about what are the needs of the next generation, how we can help them. You see, there's something that we need to reflect upon, and what is deen? Aflatun, there's three great philosophers from the ancient era. They call them Socrates, Aflatun, and Aristotle, right? Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. There's a book that was written by Aflatun called The Republic. And in this book, he gave an analogy, or an allegory. And he said, imagine that you are in a cave. You know, Allah says, Ashab al-Kahf, he tells us about that. Or in Surah al-Kahf, or there's two words. There's Kahf and Ghar. Both are Arabic words. But Ghar is generally smaller, and Kahf is bigger. So Allah even talked about this cave. So he gives an analogy of Aflatun. Now, for your knowledge, some of our ulama in the Hawza have postulated and hypothesized that not necessarily Plato, but Aristotle, his student, may have been a prophet. We don't know. They said that Allah sent 124,000 prophets, and it seems that the views of Aristotle seem very aligned with Tawheed in many ways. And so they say, maybe, we don't know, he could have been a prophet. So you don't say, I'm just pulling this out of nowhere. So now, Aflatun, his teacher, he wrote an analogy or an allegory. And he said, imagine you're in a cave. And you have been in this cave your whole life. This is all you've known. You don't even know it's called a cave because you've lived your whole life there. And as you're sitting there, you have your hands tied to the roof, to the sky, or whatever the roof is in the cave. And he said, along with you are a few other people, your companions in the cave. And he said, now imagine for a moment that it's dark there and you spent your whole life there and this is all you know. And occasionally, something passes by and you see some things on the wall in front of you. You're not facing the exit of the wall, you're facing the wall. You don't know what's called the wall. So you're in a cave, your hands are tied to the ceiling, you cannot turn around, and all you see in front of you is a wall, and sometimes on that wall you see things moving. For you and I to understand, it's called shadows. Shadows. But we don't know that, right? But they don't know that, I should say. And so he said, now imagine that your hands, only your hands got loose. Everyone else, their hands are the same. Your hands got loose, and when your hands got loose, you are now able to turn around for the first time in life. And now you see the entrance of the cave. When you see the entrance of the cave, you start getting closer, and you're thinking, should I go further or not? And as you get closer, you're seeing light. Now you don't know it's called light, but you're seeing light for the first time. When you see this light, your eyes begin to hurt. Because you're going, min al-dhulumati ila an-nur. You're going from darkness into light. And for the first time you're seeing light. Have you ever woken up in the morning and then the light hits you really hard in the first daybreak, you open the curtains or the shades? So the same way, you're now going towards the entrance of the cave, and for the first time in life, you're seeing light and your eyes are beginning to hurt because you're getting closer and you're going away from darkness. And he says eventually, you get to the edge of the cave and there's the exit in front of you. You don't even know what's called the exit. And now, your mind and heart is like, should I stay or should I go? If I go, can I come back or not? So he says, you gather the courage and you leave. When you leave, you walk a little bit, and when you walk a little bit, eventually what happens is, you go and you realize that what you just came from was not reality. You came from something else. You came from a cave. And then you go and you find out that you were living in a cave your whole life, and now you go and you find out there's a downtown Melbourne, there's a central business district, a CBD, and you find these skyscrapers, and these buildings, and you find people, and you find monuments, and cars, and trams, and subways, and metros, and Starbucks, and you name it. You're like, what on earth is going on here? So you go and ask someone, you say, hey, what is this? He said, oh, that's a train. Oh, what's that? That's a building, skyscraper. He said, what's that? So you point to where you came from, all the way down there. He said, oh, that's called a cave. So he says, whoa, cave, train, Starbucks. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So he said, look, that's a train, that's a this, that's a that, that's a that. So he said, that's a train, that's a car, that's a subway. Oh my God, I didn't know all of these things existed. And then you ask him, what's that? And he says, that's a cave. Okay. He said, okay, sometimes we see some things in the cave that move when something seems to pass by. So what is that? He says, oh, those are called shadows. You're like, cave, shadows. Oh my gosh. This is existence. All of what I knew there is not existence. That was just what I believed to be reality, but it's not anymore. And so what he said was, oh my God, now Aflatun says, now you turn around and you make the irada and the intent to go back to the cave that you came from. Now you know it's called a cave. And you know there's a wall and you know there's all this. And when you make that irada and that intent, he said you get there and you get to the entrance of the cave. And when you get to the entrance of the cave, then you think to yourself, should I go inside or not? Now, you make the irada that I'm going to go inside, the intent that I'm going to go inside. And when you enter into the cave, it's like your eyes hurt again, but the other way. Your eyes hurt this time because you're going from light into darkness. And now they're hurting the other way. When you enter into the cave, you go to those people who are your companions in the cave. You see the wall, you see the people there, and you see everything. And now, you begin to tell your companions who are in the same position, who have their hands tied to the roof, and they were not able to move. You tell them, look, guys, I just experienced something. I just saw something. You know these things that we see on the wall? You know this place we're in? This is not reality. This is one aspect. Those things that we see on the wall, those are called shadows. This is a cave that we're in. I just went outside, and real city and real life is out there. There's a city, there's cars, there's airplanes, there's municipalities, there's treasury buildings, there's parliament buildings, there's everything out there. Life is out there. There's a city with millions of people out there. We need to leave here and go there. He said, what would happen? What will your companions say? Aflatun said that your companions will say you have lost your mind. You've gone crazy, you've gone mad. Because they don't know. They cannot empathize. They've never seen what's out there. He said this is the example of when people pursue knowledge and they become aware of reality, then eventually sometimes they become alone and people don't understand this. This is exactly what had happened during the time of Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam in the Muslim world in Medina. Imam Hussain was telling people, this is what you are calling Islam right now, that's not Islam anymore. Because what Yazid had done was he had made the halal of Muhammad haram and the haram of Muhammad halal. To the point that people were so deluded and so wrong-minded that when Imam Hussain was on the plains of Karbala, some of the people of Yazid's army saying, kill Hussain quickly so we can read namaz, salah. I said, what's wrong with you? That you're killing the grandson of Rasulullah and you're saying, I need to pray. It was a complete contradiction. And so he said, do you not see? And you read the statement of Imam Hussain before he left Karbala, from Medina towards Mecca and on to Karbala, he said, do you not see that Amr bin Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar is not upheld anymore? Do you not see that justice is not adhered to anymore? You do not see that Islam, what we used to call Islam during the era of Rasulullah, is no longer that Islam. It's been changed. It was as if they were in the cave with their hands tied to the ceilings, and Imam Hussain had gone back and said, look, this what you are calling reality, which were the shadows of the people in the cave, he's saying Islam is very different. Similarly to my next generation, I invite you and I ask myself, as well as you, to really investigate what is true Islam. And when you read the books of Islam, from the ulama and the scholars and the Quran and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, you may find that the picture of Islam that you were told your whole life is like being in the cave. And when you actually read the books, you may find that it's very different than what you imagine. There's something, I'm giving you an MBA class right now. In business strategy, there's something called the Porter's 5 forces. And this is how you analyze business strategy. And the 5 forces basically says on a business, there are certain things that you have to look at, and based on that you can tell if it's a good business industry or not. So they'll tell you a few things. For example, what is the bargaining power of buyers? What is the bargaining power of suppliers? So who has the upper hand in the bargaining between buyers and suppliers? So for example, when some of these electric vehicles, they needed certain types of batteries and certain lithium ion and the lights. Or for example, there were supply chain shortages. The upper hand, so suppliers had upper hands in some of these things, and the car dealers didn't have the upper hands in some of those things. So the bargaining power of suppliers, the bargaining power of the consumer, right? So will the consumer buy your product? Certain companies, people will blindly buy their products. Other companies, no matter what they do, people won't buy their products. It's a different environment. You also have to look at the threat of other goods, substitute goods. So for example, if the price of your thing gets too expensive, will people do something else? So for example, if an airline, the tickets get way too expensive, will people say, I'm going to drive to Sydney instead, or I'm going to drive to Canberra instead, or I'm going to drive to somewhere else instead, because the tickets have gotten so expensive. So that's a substitute good. And you can go down this list and realize that there are things that are pressures on the business that can help you realize what is a good decision or not. Similarly, in Islam you will find, based on the ayah of the Quran in Surah Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُم مُّصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Where he says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ. Most surely you will be tested, Allah says. You will most surely be tested. With khawf, ju', hunger, fear, hunger, loss of wealth, loss of your own life, loss of your children, your thamarat. So even on your journey in life, there will be pressures on you in terms of your existence. Similarly, believe it or not, the mimbar has pressures on it, whether we realize it or not. And so, in that, there are elements of things that ulama that I've spoken to, they want to say certain things, but they can't, because they're afraid, will people be able to Understand it? It's like the person who's gone out of the cave and telling the people in the cave, hey, this is what Islam really says. And there has been a precedent. Many ulama, sometimes their libraries have been burnt, sometimes they've been beaten, sometimes they've even been killed. You know, the ivory tower in universities, it did not come out of a vacuum. There was a reason. The people started saying, the scholars started saying, I can't say this to people because they don't have the background on these things. What I'm telling you is this. Just try to invest some time in understanding what is Islam truly. Have a discussion with your families, with your children, with your loved ones, and discuss, you know, a verse of the Quran, an ayah of the Quran. I'll give you an example. I had the opportunity to go to Najaf on one of my trips to meet the ulama and the scholars. And you know, as speakers, we were a group of speakers, and we wanted to ask, you know, what are some gifts or some guidance you can give us as ulama to share with people back in the UK and the US? And we said one of the things that people are starving for in the West is spirituality. Everyone wants spirituality. Even in the broader community, people say, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. You know, this concept, right? There was an article in the New York Times that said there's a new swear word, you know, curse words, 4-letter words that people use, and it said it's the R word. And if you want to curse someone, it's not a 4-letter word, but you just call them religious. That's how you curse someone in today's era. Because the idea was that these people become so stubborn with this negative connotation. So people say, no, I want to be spiritual, I want to be religious. But true religion was supposed to be something that makes us harmonious and loving and affectionate towards one another. And so we have to get back to those basics of what Islam truly wanted us to understand about that. So, coming back to this, when we think about this, what are those commonalities? What's the next phase of the needs of our communities? The next generation has to really start. So when we ask them about spirituality, and this will connect to what I want to say right after that, is this. We said, can you give us something, a verse of the Quran, some dua, some amal, something that we can give to other people and they'll become more spiritual. And he thought about it, this very ruhani, spiritual alim, and he said, there is one thing I can think of that may help you. He said, this dua is so powerful that if you can read it every day, read it every day. If you can't read it every day, read it every week. And if you can't read it every week, read it every month. If you can't read it every month, read it every year. And if you can't read it every year, just read it once in a lifetime. It'll change your life. And so we were all on the edge of our seat saying, what dua is he going to say? And he said, the dua is called Dua Kumail. We all sat back in our seats and we said, wow. We recite this every Thursday across the United States, across the United Kingdom, across the world. But what we understood in that moment was what Dua Kumail was in that alim's mind and what it was in our mind was two different worlds. Two different worlds. What he was getting out of the dua and what we were getting out of the dua was. Some of us were just reciting it, we just have to finish it. Just finish dua. We don't know what's being said. It's a powerful dua. I mean, by the way, it was a dua taught by Imam Ali to Kumail bin Ziyad al-Naqai. But the generosity of the Imam was he named the dua after Kumail. The dua al-Khizr. But the knowledge and the wisdom is the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So similarly, you may find that Allah's given you all the things. But sometimes there's an old saying that you never go through the same river twice. And the idea is the river may be different in the currents, but you're also different. You're not the same person. And I thought to me, and I'll say one last thing before I conclude, is, I mean, this is something separate. Satya Nadella is the CEO of Microsoft. You may have heard of this company. And he says, not my words, his words. In fact, one brother from our community who's a good friend and mentor of mine was, they became Satya Nadella and became VPs on the same day. And so, Satya Nadella said this on a public forum. And he said what inspires him to be innovative, believe it or not, he said is poetry. In fact, he said Urdu poetry. In fact, he said the poetry of Ghalib. And he said that every day, there's one line that he reinterprets of Ghalib every day. Now this is a person who's the head of $1 trillion company, right? And he says, Hazar al-Khwahish yasi ki har khwahish pe and so, this same Ghalib is the one who's also said, Ghalib nadi mein dost se aati hai bue dost, mashghul haq mein bandagi hai, hu turab mein. And he has many other things. But anyways, I thought to myself that if this person, in what he said, what Satya Nadella said was, every day, the interpretation of this line of Ghalib changes for me. So I thought, If this is the language and the words of makhluk, of the creation, what about the words of the Khaliq, the creator? That is the Quran. We sometimes run over the verses of the Quran. But the verses of the Quran are inviting us to think over and over and over and over again. And in that you will get wisdom. That if people can say from insan's creation you can get this benefit, then what can you get from the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Imam Sajjad says, if everyone perished from the east to the west, and only what remained with me was the Quran, I would still not feel lonely. Allah. What is he saying there? This book, there's so many miracles of the Quran, but just one is 1 billion, 2 billion people on this planet who are followers of Islam, 8 billion people on this, even non-Muslims. If I have time, I'll tell you the miracles of non-Muslims who are guided by the Quran. There's many Hindu professors of Arabic language who became Muslim after reading the Quran. Or others who were looking for answers in their life, they opened the Quran and they said, this book is speaking to me. The miracle, one of the miracles of the Quran is 8 billion people, and it speaks to each individual individually, to that person. You will not find another book like that on this planet, that it's speaking to the reader on a personalized basis. Develop a relationship with this book. I invite myself and I invite you. You see, when it comes to the Quran, there is the Quran al-Natiq and the Quran al-Samit. And that is, there is the silent Quran and the speaking Quran. And this happened in the moment of Siffin. In Siffin, on one side you had the likes of Muawiyah and his men. And on the other side you had Imam Ali alayhi salam in leadership. Now, when it came to this, the patterns repeat. And I often tell people, and I'll remind those who have heard my other majlis that I mentioned this in, you don't need heavy philosophy to understand who's right and wrong in Karbala and in Siffin. Just look at who gave water and who cut off water. Water is a basic human need. But when it was Siffin, Muawiyah, he was given water by Imam Ali alayhi salam. But when Muawiyah had control of the water, he cut off water for Imam Ali and his troops. Same in Karbala. In Karbala, when it came to this, Imam Hussein had control of the water, he gave water to everyone, even Horse battalion and the animals. But when the tables turned, Yazid never gave water to the other side. You want to know who's human, who's on the right path? Just look at who has more humanity. You'll get your answer. So the same applied here. In Siffin, Imam Ali is winning the battle. And when he's winning the battle, he had certain people, Muawiyah, who were very shrewd, cunning, conniving, fox-like advisors. One was, of course, Ubayd ibn Ziyad and the likes of Sa'd, but he had another one by the name of Amr ibn As. And this one was a shrewd, cunning politician who would manipulate people left, right, and center. And he said, what can we do? We're losing the battle. He said, what do we do? He thought, he cooked up a plan. Muawiyah is having this conversation with Amr ibn As. Amr ibn As said, look, there's one thing we can do. Let's put the Quran on spears. And when we put the Quran on spears, the army of Ali will stop fighting. And at that point in time, he said, very good. So they put the physical Quran, the book, on spears. You know, people say now the Quran shouldn't be disrespected, what's happening in Sweden, and it's wrong and it's very disrespectful. But I asked the Muslim world, why don't you first condemn those Muslims who put the Quran on spears in your own history? Those are radiallahu and the others are radiallahu. I mean, both can't be, right? We have to seek truth. So anyways, they put the Quran on spears. And some of the people in Imam Ali's army themselves began to say, Ya Ali, we can't fight any further. We can't fight any further. Why? Because they put the Quran on spears. It's as if we'd be fighting the Quran. Imam Ali alayhi salam said at that time, he gave the historic statement. He said, you are discussing the Quran, whereas that is the Quran is Samit, the silent Quran, and Quran al-Natiq, I'm the speaking Quran. Meaning what? If you want to see the implementation of the Quran, you have to see it through Rasulullah, through Imam Ali, through Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And in our world, don't we have this? You have, when you study sciences and STEM, you have the theory and then you have the practical labs. Similarly, the Quran gives you the theory. But if we just had the book, we are not those who agree with Hasbuna Kitabullah. The book of Allah is sufficient for us. Because if the book was sufficient, then Allah would have said that's sufficient. And someone could have said, for example, Ya Allah, you gave these examples of the book. There was Nuh, and there was Ibrahim and Musa and all them, sure, but I didn't see anyone implement these laws after them. There had to be some people. And that's where Allah says, I've given you these, the Prophet and the 12 Imams afterwards. And there is an Imam that is guiding us till this day. On that basis that there has to be someone who's giving us and showing us the practical implementation of this. Otherwise someone could go on Yawm al-Qiyamah and say, Ya Allah, this was theoretical fairy tales. Nobody could actually be so just and honest and fair. And so Allah kept that principle there. And the poet captures this so well that history repeats itself, whether we realize it or not. And I'm concluding here. He says, Jal rahe hain jo diye, unko bujhaya jaye. आज बस शम्मे मवद्दत को जलाया जाए और शाम वालों ने ये दस्तूर बना रखा है शाम वालों ने ये दस्तूर बना रखा है हार कर नेज़ों पे कुरान उठाया जाए. This idea that the people of Sham, the father was from Sham, the son was from Sham. The father put the physical Quran on the spear and the son put the speaking Quran on the spear, the head of Imam Hussaini alayhi salam. And if you're not astute about the patterns, history is bound to repeat itself. This is what happened. People ask the question about Yazid. How is it that Allah allowed this to happen? And will Allah send him to hell, for example, forever? And the ulama and the Ahlul Bayt have answered this question. The reality is, Karbala was not his only offense. You go to the law system and the judicial system here in Australia and they'll tell you, if someone does a first-time offense, it's very different than someone who does a second-time offense or a third-time offense. Meaning, if someone does something accidentally, the society will say, look, let's be lenient. But if someone is consistently committing murder, God forbid, then the system will say, look, we need to remove this person from society, if nothing else to protect society. He's going to kill innocent people. What happened after Karbala? After Karbala, did Yazid show remorse? Or did he stop what he was doing? No. He attacked Makkah and he attacked Medina. There are riwayat from Rasulullah clearly that anyone who does this is not from the Muslims. He made the mosque of Rasulullah a stable where horses were kept. When you go to Mecca, there are things that I cannot tell you from the Mimbar that were done in this name of these actions of Waqat al-Harra, for example, and what happened on the pillaging of Mecca and Medina. So he had no sense of that correction. For those who had remorse and the sense of correction, the Ahlul Bayt showed that. Horror is a prime example. So they were not trying to have it, there was no ego with the Ahlul Bayt. The ego was all on the other side. So now, the take-home message tonight is this. Try to spend some time with family, truly understand what Islam is. Don't fully compartmentalize Islam. If you are living a life where you are aspiring to be a successful member of society, well, Islam has never been against that. Islam has in fact encouraged that. And so we should not say that, oh, this is my dunyavi life and this is my dini life. Rather, we should say that this is a vehicle to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That I use what wealth Allah may give me, or what influence Allah may give me, or what ability may Allah may give me. You may not have to say a word. Maybe your gift is art, and you do art to inspire people to what is reality. That could be poetry, that could be physical art, different forms. But just have that vision that you want to do something for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way the Quran taught. This is what Imam Hussain teaches us, that in the final moments on the day of Karbala, he said a line that I think one should never forget. He said, Ilahi qad wafayta ufu bi'ahdik. My Lord, I have fulfilled my promise. You fulfill your promise. Meaning what? That Imam Hussain knew that when he does whatever is in his ability, the rest is onto Allah. The same is true for us. The same is true for us when we deal with our business life and entrepreneurship and deen. If we truly, truly aspire to do the right thing, we'll be guided.